And joining me now is Tom Bonier, political strategist and senior advisor for Target Smart. Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki and former press secretary in the Biden White House, and MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle. Thank you all for being here. Tom, you have been invoked, and so I'm going to start with you. I would normally do ladies first, but I'm going to start with you, Tom. You tweeted about and prompted us to call you. You tweet, we call you. And about this explosion of women registering to vote and the resulting gender gap. Can you please explain?
I'd be happy to. This really caught me by surprise because we're always looking at the registration trends. I know we're all obsessed with polling. I am too. But we know that polling doesn't tell the whole story. The more important data is that individual level data that's showing us the actions people are taking. So the question that we asked of the data was, could we see something that happened after July 21st with the candidate change? And what I saw was honestly shocking. We saw gender gaps in new registration data across the country in every state that we've looked at that has updated their file already, which is many, that were exceeding the post-Dobbs gender gaps that we saw. And we know those were bigger than any that had been seen before. And so we're talking about battleground states like Michigan and North Carolina, where it's not just little differences. It's women registering at a significantly higher rate than they were prior to that or that they were 4 years ago at the same period of time, especially younger women and women of color.
And Tom, just to be clear, I mean, women tend to vote at higher rates than men. I'm right about that, correct? In general, right? And right. Across sort of racial dynamics. So are these polling differences, are they taking into account race and gender? Because we know that black women are overwhelmingly Democrats. So if 100 black women register to vote, 95 of them are going to vote Democratic. For white women, it's much more, well, lately it's been like 47% Democratic and 52 the other way, 53 the other way. Are the dynamics of race kind of in play here in terms of these voter registrations, or can we even tell?
Well, yeah, it's an important additional point to this. In a lot of these states, they have partisan registration. And so what we're seeing is that it's not just more women registering, it's more Democratic women. In states that don't have partisan registration, our teams have built partisan models. In the state of Michigan, it's plus 20 Democratic in terms of these people who are registering to vote or have registered to vote since the vice president ascended to the top of the ticket. You mentioned polling. That's a big concern here. Every pollster has to come up with a likely voter model to predict who's going to vote. Are these women included in these likely voter models? At this point, the likely answer is no.
See that, and Jen, I want to go to you on that because that's the thing is that people who are getting obsessed with these polls, even look, my kids are texting me about polls at this point. Everyone is very much fixated on them, but it's hard to really suss out how accurate they are. I'll just read you a couple. This is New York Times Siena, the notorious. We read it a lot, although I have deep doubts about it. Women, Trump 39, women, Harris 56. Men, it's the other way around. Trump 55, 40. You look at stuff like that, or the battleground poll, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, same gender gap. Women, women Trump 40, women Harris 55, 56, 38 the other way when it comes to men. But it's very hard to look at those and not take into account which women and which men are going to vote.
That's true. I mean, every polling's imperfect. Every poll is a bet on who the electorate is going to be, right? And it doesn't mean it's betting correctly on who the electorate is going to be. And what we've seen, this is why when there are polls or analysis that's comparing 2020 voters to who they are and who they're with to now, is missing 2022 when the Dobbs decision came out, and that completely enraged women across the country. So what you hear when you talk, and I know you talk to a lot of these people too, Joy, people who are running organizations like Emily's List or organizations that are focused on abortion rights and reaching these women, what they tell you is that these women are undercounted. And that we see that in special elections. We've seen that in the midterm elections, because this is an issue where it's hard for people to bet on what percentage of the electorate is going to turn out who otherwise wouldn't have. And that's so interesting to hear what Tom said about what's happened over the past couple of months. As you know, and you've covered and I've covered, Kamala Harris, the vice president, was out there across the country talking about abortion rights and abortion access long before she became the Democratic nominee. It's an issue she's very comfortable talking about. She's been across the country talking about for many, many months. And it's interesting if that's a factor in how this is playing out.
Absolutely, and I'm glad. And this is the reason that I like having Tom Bonier on. He and Simon Rosenberg were two of the few people, particularly male, pundit and polling aggregators and people who look at polls that saw the post-Dobbs change. It was one of the reasons that I was very clear on how the 2022 election was going to go, is because Dobbs is a thing, and a lot of people were like inflation. On this show, we were like Dobbs. Let me bring you in here, Basil, because there's one number that you cannot fake and that you cannot. It's not subject to interpretation, and it's called money. And here's how much money the Harris-Walz campaign is sucking in like a vacuum cleaner. $82 million during the DNC convention. $540 million total since their campaign launch. And I'll remind you, their campaign launch was just on July 21st, like 3-4 weeks ago. They are hoovering in money. And so the number one, the question is, will Donald Trump be able to ask them for a loan so he can pay off his debt to New York? And question number two is, what should they do with it? Because, we say a lot on this show, ads are sexy, but field wins campaigns. If you had that money to spend, where would you spend it?
Yeah, and I'll start just by pivoting off of Jen's point, because I went from seeing one of the worst months that I've seen in Democratic politics to absolutely one of the best months I've seen in Democratic politics. And when you look at that $500 million that's been raked in, I've been saying for a while, I don't want to see it all on TV. I want to see it on the street. I want to see it on the ground. Tim Walz said, just leave it all on the field. And the reality is, I think that's where it's the most effective. And owing to the numbers about voter registration, the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, had been saying earlier that one of the biggest strategies they've been employing is trying to register more people to vote. But I'd love to see that money spent on the ground, even in digital ads, because we got to get into people's social networks. We've got to do some door knocking. They've got a couple of 100,000 scheduled, shifts. They've got almost 1 million volunteers since they've gotten into this race. And when you add to that, they are on top of that, all of that money, they have this almost limitless opportunity to really just go to a voter's home, take them by the hand, and take them to the polls. And I have to talk about, just for a second, why that's so important, because there's still all of this voter suppression looming out there. Mm-hmm. And so all of this activity is really going to make sure that we overcome, that Democrats largely overcome that hurdle to make sure those that want to go vote for her are able to cast that vote.
Yeah, some of it's going to have to spend on lawyers because there's going to be some litigation. And to go back to you for a moment, Jen, and I should also point out, on the other side, people who are Republican strategists are describing Donald Trump's fundraising as a black hole because they don't know where the money's going. And it doesn't seem to be going to field, Jen. It seems like they're either spending it on his legal fees or I don't know what they're doing with it, buying Trump hats.
We have a suspicion, Joy, and where some of it may be going, but who knows? Yes, go ahead.
So from your point of view, though, having worked on these Democratic campaigns as well as Basil has as well, are Democrats going to be able to resist the temptation to use it all on ads? And to really do field, because you think about East North Carolina, places they normally, not the big cities of North Carolina, but the rural parts of North Carolina. Yeah. You think about, I don't know, dream with me, Florida. Is it unwinnable? I don't know. This year, I'm not sure. They've got an abortion amendment on the ballot. Is the thinking broad when you're talking to party folks about spending that money on the ground?
Yes. Well, first of all, the DNC was already doing that. Now they have a whole lot more money to play with. But the key thing here, as Basil knows, is that the money goes through the state parties a lot of time to invest in the organizing and build up these local organizations that are doing all of this outreach and going door to door and doing all of that. I'll also add on the digital front, they're going to spend an enormous amount of money on digital ads. And they're also using digital as an organizing tool, right? To do that neighbor to neighbor organizing and engaging, because you don't believe anybody more than you believe your neighbor, right? And people you actually know. So that is something they're investing in. The last thing I'll add, Joy, is one thing they can kind of have fun with is they can play in places to make the Trump team also play in them, like Florida, right? And Texas. And also maybe drive Trump a little crazy in the process. So we'll see if they do that, but they have the money to do that. And I agree, the organizing is important. A big part of that is investing in state parties and organizations on the ground that are already doing the work.
And I will note that the youngest Democratic state chair is in North Carolina, a state that has a huge opportunity for Democrats. Don't ignore the South, Democrats. Don't ignore the South. Tom Bonier.
She's great.
The best there is. Come back often. Absolutely. Tom Bonier.